Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to this webinar. We have today voices from Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania in memory of Per Carlsen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of DIIS, the Danish Institute for International Studies. My name is Flemming Splutz, and I'll be your host today in what I believe and expect will be a spectacular afternoon. We are here, of course, to celebrate the memory of Ambassador Per Carlsen, who unfortunately passed away in December, just before Christmas. And I have gathered today and also tomorrow a number of his friends and colleagues, people from his vast network who have agreed to join us today and to bring us interesting thoughts, ideas, perspectives on different topics that Per himself would also have found interesting. So when I reach out to the speakers today and tomorrow, I said the only requirement in a way is that we put together a webinar that Per would also have attended. And I'm sure if he had still been with us, he would also have joined us today. So again, it's my great pleasure to welcome you. Some of you knew Per, some of you even worked with Per. For those of you who didn't know him, I should say he was a very accomplished, very successful Danish diplomat, serving as ambassador to a number of countries, including to Latvia, Lithuania, and also to Russia. And he was also the first director of DIIS, the Danish Institute for International Studies. So it seems very appropriate that we today are hosting this event. And there's a spectacular lineup today. It's an indication, of course, of the vast network that Per had. And when I reached out to the speakers, everyone was very enthusiastic and even suggested more names. So we could have been here all day. What we have today is a spectacular lineup. Expect to be here for about 2.5 hours. And we have 5 speakers for you today, and there is no overarching theme. So we have 5 speakers, and each speaker has been given a free hand to address what he or she finds interesting, relevant, would like to share. And we start with Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, former Minister of Foreign Affairs for Denmark, and our most prominent Baltic voice. Now, today we have voices from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, of course, is from Denmark, but he is a very prominent Baltic voice, and I find it very appropriate that he should start. Then we go to Estonia. We would have Marina Carliorant, who is also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former ambassador, now a member of the European Parliament. We go to Lithuania. Vigaudas Ušackas, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, also former ambassador. Now on the board of directors of Avia Solutions. And then we go to Latvia, we go to academic perspectives. First, we have the spectacular Professor Sanjata Uzolina, who's at Riga University. And then we have the also brilliant Andris Splutz, who is the director of the Latvian Institute for International Affairs. And as I said in my introduction, Per Carlsen, of course, was a diplomat, but he was also the first director at DIIS. So it seems very right that we put together a combination of speakers here. We have politicians, people who worked in diplomacy, foreign affairs, and then we have researchers also. And these are researchers, of course, that we also already have close connections to here at DIIS. So with this, I welcome you, and I look forward to a very interesting afternoon. We have 5 speakers, as I said. Each speaker has been given some 20 minutes. Then we'll take a few questions. You can write your questions in the Q&A button that you find in the bottom of your screen. And the chat function does not operate during this session. So if you have anything that you would like to share, any questions, then please put them in the Q&A session, and I'll try to keep up with that, and I'll collect a few questions for our speakers. With this, let me welcome you again. I would like to welcome now first Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, former Minister of Foreign Affairs for Denmark. And Uffe, please.
Thank you, Flemming. Per Carlsen was a pivotal figure in his last 30 years as a driving force in the establishment of close relations between Denmark and the Baltic countries. He was also a dear personal friend. As a diplomat, a think tanker, a writer, well, he was everywhere, untiredly working for his ideals: democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights and rules-based international cooperation. And he left his mark in so many places. I believe it will be in the spirit of Per when I choose as my theme of this webinar the challenges facing small nations in the world of today, in particular, how we defend our democratic values. Both the Baltic countries and Denmark are small countries, at least compared to many other countries, and we share a lot. Geography, of course, what you call the West Sea, we call the East Sea. We also share ideals and beliefs, and we have for some time also belonged to the same families, Northern family as well as the European and the Atlantic. Our special relations goes back 30 years. After the Oman attacks in January 1991 on the TV tower in Vilnius and the Saima in Riga, Denmark signed 3 joint protocols of cooperation with each of the Baltic countries. Here it was stated that the recognition by Denmark of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania as independent states from 1921 was still valid. Denmark had never recognized the forcible inclusion of the Baltic countries into the Soviet Union in 1940. And we intended instead to re-establish diplomatic relations as soon as the situation made it possible. At that time, none of us, I guess, believed this would happen soon. But I tell you, they got hopping mad in Moscow, calling our ambassador up there in the foreign ministry for verbal bashing. And the Soviet ambassador in Copenhagen, he showed up in our ministry with a strong protest and thinly veiled threats to make life difficult for us in some areas where we were at the time vulnerable. Well, they never materialized because in August that year, things started to happen very quickly. The putsch in Moscow, as we are all old enough to remember, I believe, started on a Monday morning, but already on Wednesday, it became clear that the putsch had failed. And on Saturday, August the 24th, we were in a position to declare that we were now re-establishing diplomatic relations with the 3 Baltic countries. What followed was a very busy time for all of us. It was as if the world had opened up and a lot of dreams were coming through. Francis Fukuyama wrote his famous book about the end of history, and we were all deeply involved in the creation of the new world order and the new European structure. What followed was NATO enlargement and EU enlargement, and optimism was in the driving seat. That was then. Today we are facing a different world. The ideals and values of European integration as they are formulated in the so-called Copenhagen criteria are being attacked, both from abroad and from some member states. Now, were we naive at that time when Fukuyama's end of history was openly exaggerated and misunderstood? To some extent, yes, but it was difficult not to be. I remember warning at the time that we had to remember that the medal of freedom has got two sides, and that the backside meant that freedom could be used and misused to settle old scores. That excessive nationalism that had been kept under a lid during the oppressive years could resurface, and that this could lead to policies where national minorities or neighbors were targeted, both in order to settle old scores and to cover for lack of results on the way to a better future. And that was what happened. And the scourge of excessive nationalism is now found in all countries, both in old democracies as well as what is still sometimes called new democracies, and in small as well as in bigger countries. We find it indeed in my country, and we find it in your countries. Now, nationalism does not have to be a negative force. Being proud of your nation and your heritage can be a positive driver. But if it leads to rejection of international cooperation, we do have a problem. Europe is facing some very existential challenges. The traditional American leadership in the Atlantic Alliance has weakened, and traditional American leadership in the international organizations that the US were prime movers in creating after World War II has been overshadowed by the battle cry of America first. At the same time, we face a Russia bent on revanchism and lack of respect for the international order that Russia itself was part in creating in the 90s. Most of the agreements that we toiled to establish during the last phase of the Cold War has either been scrapped or just brushed aside. Most dramatically when Russia seized Crimea and is fighting the war in eastern Ukraine. But we have also witnessed how many of the confidence and security building measures that came out of the Helsinki process has just been thrown away. We have seen how some of the agreements dealing with the nuclear threat are either scrapped or will soon expire unless serious efforts are undertaken by both major nuclear powers. All of this leaves Europe more vulnerable, in particular the smaller European countries that are now frontline states, among them the Baltic states and Poland. And this is where the need for an active NATO alliance becomes so important. NATO has established a presence in these frontline states, the so-called EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence, where a limited number of troops from other NATO countries, big as well as small, are stationed in what sometimes is called a tripwire or a road bump, demonstrating alliance solidarity against possible aggression. If you mess with one country, you will be met with a response from all countries, one for all and all for one. I still remember one ice-cold morning in Vilnius, the day after the NATO enlargement with the Baltic countries was decided at the Prague summit. I'm sure you remember that morning as well, Vigaudas. The American president at the time, George W. Bush, declared there that from now on, anyone who made himself an enemy of Lithuania would also become an enemy of the United States. And the response from thousands of freezing Lithuanians that stood and stamped their feet on the town hall square in Vilnius was deafening. Achoo, achoo, they said. And Bushi turned to President Adamkus and said, what are they saying? And he's sneezing, and Adamkus said, achoo means thank you. And on the wall of the town hall in Vilnius, you can see the quote on a plaque commemorating this event. It is important that all European NATO partners signal that this is not only an American undertaking. We are all part of it, big and small. But this does not change the fact that the security of Europe depends on the American support of the alliance. And we have been reminded that this support cannot be taken for granted. It is important that we Europeans demonstrate our readiness to live up to the rules and agreements that binds the alliance together. In other words, the days are over when the disproportionate size of the American column in the alliance and the European column in the alliance was just something you could brush aside and take for a fact. And this example shows us what is the core of the challenges faced by the small countries of Europe today. We have to make us worth defending, even though this will demand an extra effort on our side. The same goes for the cohesion of the European Union. We may have all kinds of worries and reservations with regard to the so-called loss of sovereignty that is part of belonging to such a union, like accepting a special set of rules where we can be overruled if we want to go our own ways. But at the end of the day, it can only weaken the cohesion upon which we are much more depending than the bigger member states if we try to go our own ways. Just look what happened with Brexit. This is indeed an eye-opener for the smaller nations of Europe. There is a price to pay if you want to go your own way, and the Brits, or rather the English, have yet to find out how big that price is. Now, I am particularly worried about the way in which the EU has proved unable to tackle the challenge from those member states that wants to go their own way with regard to democratic rules, while remaining in and benefiting from the membership of the EU. Countries like Hungary and also Poland are doing exactly that, playing with democracy in a way that is not acceptable, from weakening freedom of the press to undermining the rule of law and using gerrymandering and other tricks to change the democratic structure. If I should have some regrets today with regard to the enlargement process that culminated with the EU summit in Copenhagen 2003, it is that we did not create at that time sufficient instruments to deal with member countries that forgot the basic rules once they were in. Well, there is of course an article that can take away voting rights from member states, the so-called nuclear option, but that cannot be used once that more than one member state goes its own ways. Instead, we have to hope that there is sufficient political will to deal with such members in a way that takes money away from them. I cannot see other ways to go. I am only too aware of the havoc this will bring, but we cannot allow the disrespect for basic rules of democracy to spread. In this complicated picture, the role of the small countries is a clear one. It is in our own best interest to support the structures, both in the EU and in other fora, and defend them from attacks from those who wish to turn the time back to a time when everybody believed they could make their own rules. Some have compared the present situation with the Cold War. I don't agree. After all, we had certain safeguards established in order to avoid catastrophe. A price was paid for that, as many of us, of course, know. No, I rather fear that we are moving back to what we saw in the 1930s, where the lack of international order and lack of international leadership led to a situation where you tried to make your neighbor the loser. Beggar thy neighbor, as it was called, and where this led to poverty and social disruption, and in the end to the rise of undemocratic regimes and war. Democracy is under pressure, not just in Europe, but globally. The rise of China, democratic breakdowns in Latin America, plus the pressure from conflicts in Africa and the Middle East, explosive numbers of migrants and refugees, and even the risk of war between two NATO countries, Turkey and Greece, and the internal challenge faced by the new American president, who will take up his seat tomorrow. Well, this all bears down heavily on Europe. And being small means that you are first in line if the elephants start to trample down the grass. That would be a pity indeed, because small nations carry a lot of value. If they manage to deal with excessive nationalism within their own borders, in other words, we have to keep our own houses in order. Per Carlsen knew that. In Per's last piece, commissioned by Carnegie in Moscow and published shortly after his death, he wrote about it. Per's subject was how to build trust between Russia and the Baltic states. He underlined the need to support dialogue with Russia, but he underlined also that this is to take place, and I quote from Per's article, without jeopardizing the international rules-based system on which any small state is heavily reliant. And he added later, we should stand our ground in support of that rules-based system, from our UN Charter through the Helsinki Final Act and various Council of Europe conventions and protocols. We should continue to defend these rules and principles and make others who have also subscribed to them accountable. End of quote. Thank you, Per. You are sorely missed.
Thank you, Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, for your remarks, for your thoughts about developments, both earlier but also present developments, of course. Now, you didn't mention the US president. You did mention, of course, the incoming US president, and we're waiting for the inauguration of Joe Biden, and it's anticipated many places. May I ask you just to reflect on these last 4 years, the preceding 4 years, what did they mean for smaller states in Europe? Did they change anything for smaller states? And how do you see relations now between these smaller states and the US, and relations perhaps between these smaller states now with the new US president? Will things go back to as they were before?
No, things will not, I'm afraid. I think what it meant, first of all, to small states is that we have become much more reliant on the European cooperation. Because not that any of us believed that we could do without the United States, but we simply had to move together and to look hard those big countries in Europe who really possessed some power when it came to defend our eastern borders, to be frank about it. And therefore the Brexit was such a heavy blow to European cooperation. But I believe we will continue to live with that. The new president, he will try, I'm sure, to re-establish some of the order that was before, rejoin the Paris Charter, make sure that NATO does not feel that America is forgetting them, and many other things. But he will also have to focus stronger on the challenges from China and the challenges in the Eastern Pacific. So there will not be room just to let the Europeans have a free lunch, as a number of us had before Trump came and reminded us that there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Thank you. And if you will just allow me an additional question, I'm curious about the European Union. Now, you're famously pro-European, of course, and in favor of integration. And you mentioned some of the challenges facing the European Union now, including from within. So we have member states, you didn't mention them, but we do have member states that may be challenging liberal democratic order that the European Union is also built on. And you point to the nuclear option and the necessity perhaps for using sort of economic leverage to deal with them. How do you see this working? What will it do to the European Union if we are, the European Union, let's say, is under pressure in such a way that it has to threaten member states with, in a way, economic sanctions, or at least the economic consequences of their actions?
Of course, it will weaken the European Union. And there will be, pardon my French, a hell of a lot of noises coming from many countries, not only those who are going to be hit by this, but if nothing is done, I believe that the dangers facing the European Union and the cohesion of the Union are even bigger. So something has to be done, and I don't have fantasy to see anything but using economic means.
All right, thank you for your presentation. I suggest that we move on. And with this, I thank you and I welcome our next speaker, Marina Carliorant, who is, as I said in the introduction, also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former diplomat, former ambassador, and now a member of the European Parliament. And Marina, I hope you are here.
Yes, can you hear me?
I do hear you. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Yes, and I can't put on my camera as my screen says that you cannot start your... Okay, now it seems that I can start my video. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. We see you. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Flemming, thank you so much for inviting me. As I see today's discussion, it's the celebration of the life of Per Carlsen. We all have our memories of him. We all miss him in one way or another. And I'll be happy to share my very personal memories of Per. But before doing that, I would also like very much to thank former Minister Uffe Ellemann-Jensen for his remarks today, but I think even more importantly, for being such an old and good friend of the Baltics. I know it's a huge mistake to speak on behalf of all Baltics, so I'm not going to do it furthermore. I'll be speaking on behalf of Estonia. And Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, when thinking about your remarks, I found a quote from your friend, whom we don't have with us anymore, Lennart Meri. What he said on the day when you decided to withdraw from politics. Lennart Meri said that Uffe Ellemann-Jensen may withdraw from Danish politics, but he cannot withdraw from Estonian history. Estonia has learned the greatest art in politics from him. And he has been one of the Baltic architects. So Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, thank you so much for your remarks. And to some extent, I would like to say the same words about Per. Now my personal experience. I've been Estonian ambassador to 6 countries: Russia, United States, Canada, Mexico, Kazakhstan, Israel. But of course, one of the most challenging postings was to Russia, Moscow. I'm a strong believer in diplomacy. I'm a strong believer in old diplomatic ways of talking to other people, to listening to other people, to trying to understand other people. So as an ambassador, I arrived in 2005. I started with my courtesy calls. Of course, the first courtesy calls go to the Baltic and Nordic neighboring countries. And it was the first time when I had the opportunity to talk to Per one-to-one for a longer period. He was not very traditional. He was not a traditional diplomat. He was a think tank personality, and he remained a think tank personality. He was more outspoken. He had a sense of humor that maybe not everybody understood. He was very open and he was very frank. What I learned from our first meeting was that if I need information about what's happening in Russia, if I need information about whom to talk to, whom to trust, and whom not to trust, that one of the sources is Per. Of course, he didn't give me all the information. While we are ambassadors, we are always fighting for the best pieces of information. We are exchanging some, but keeping a lot to ourselves. But as I said, I've served as Estonian ambassador in 6 countries, and Moscow was the only country where I really felt that we, Nordics, Baltics, EU, NATO, were one team. We had each other's back protected. We listened to each other, and we shared information with each other. Moscow was a challenging posting for me. It was also the year of 2007. If you remember, 2007 was the year when bilateral relations between Estonia and Russia were at its lowest. It was the year when Estonia fell under cyber attacks, and it was a real wake-up call for the digital and cyber community worldwide. And I think it's very symbolic that I'm mentioning digital and cyber today, when COVID-19 has accelerated the topic and has brought on the primary agenda. 2007, nobody really cared about cybersecurity. So when I was trying to discuss it with my Nordic Baltic colleagues, I can't say that there was much enthusiasm. For them, cyber was something out of the reach. It was something hypothetical, something happening somewhere, never happening to us. So that's why 2007 was an important step. Also, it was the time, 26th of April, was the day when the riots started in Estonia, and my embassy with my staff fell under the siege by the Russian Nazist movement for a week. It was a difficult week. It was very difficult for me to leave the embassy. Russian authorities did not do much, or I should say, did nothing to protect or to fulfill their obligations under the Vienna Conventions to provide the working space, immunity, safety, and protection to the diplomats working in my embassy. Nothing like that happened. And during those days, I think you feel your friends and your colleagues' support the most. So who are the ones who called me every day? Who were the ones who came to my embassy when it was under siege. Latvian, Lithuanian, Swedish, Danish, and American ambassadors. I will never forget it. And then I can't say that we agreed with Per on everything, which was what was happening in Russia. For me, he was naive on some points. For me, he believed too much in rules-based order and our possibility to change Russia and to make Russia behave according to the same principles that Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen mentioned in his remarks. And when I tried to bring him to the earth and tried to explain how information operations against Baltic countries were going on a daily basis, we had a couple of arguments, but he always listened. He always took my position very seriously, and he was always an excellent colleague and partner to share and try your ideas with. I also remember how after the difficult week of 2007, it was almost impossible for an Estonian ambassador to reach out to Kremlin or to other institutions because nobody wanted to talk to a fascist ambassador. Yes, because the whole Moscow was, the center of Moscow and metro were covered with my photos. I had Hitler mustache, and the message said, "Разыскивается посол фашистского государства, search warrant for an ambassador of a fascist nation." Can't tell you I was a popular person in Moscow. And when I needed some high-level meetings together with other colleagues, it was Per who offered. Do you want to have a lunch? Do you want to have a dinner? Whom should we invite? And I'll seat you next to that person. So even if foreign minister or deputy foreign minister of Russia did want to sit to next Estonian ambassador during the official dinners, they had to do it. They had to listen to me, they had to talk to me, because that was Per's way of helping, assisting, of being human, but also with a sense of humor and joke. When I became Estonian foreign minister, we had a couple of meetings with Per. He was always coming to the Lennart Meri conference, which is a foreign policy conference in Estonia. And I would say that the conference never happened without his presence. And it was difficult not to notice him. The way he approached you, the way you hugged you, the way he started asking about your life, the way how he joked, he was a personality. And what I like the most, he never became a typical ambassador. He never became a typical diplomat. He was open, he was frank, he was a friend. Before and after Moscow, Per served as Danish ambassador to Latvia and Lithuania. He never served as an ambassador to Estonia. And I didn't have the chance to ask, Per, how come? Maybe it was written in the stars to do it somewhere later. But even if he didn't have the time to serve as a Danish ambassador to Estonia, I'd like to refer to the words that I started with. I can't say that Lennart Meri said that, but I can say on behalf of me. Per has many friends in Estonia. To many of us, he has left a mark, he has left a memory that we will not forget. The way he stood for human rights, the way how outspoken he was when he saw something that he didn't like, that is something we'll have to learn from. That is something that we will miss when we talk about Per. So these were my memories about working with Per in Moscow. After the difficult times and serving there together, I think all the ambassadors who serve at the same time in Moscow become friends forever. So even if we were not meeting on a regular basis, we kept track of each other. We ran into each other at different conferences. And it was good to know that there is a person like Per somewhere who cares about the Baltics, who cares about Estonia, and even more importantly, who is a real, true friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for these very touching words, and also, of course, for your reflections on your time in Moscow, which we all understand was very difficult, but also at the same time, of course, super interesting, and it was a very interesting time. Now, if I may ask you to put on a different hat and speak perhaps as a member of the European Parliament, because Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen just touched on a very sensitive issue, of course, which is how do we deal with some of the states inside the European Union who may not be subscribing, as some other member states would expect, to liberal democratic order. And we even have a question here. It's from Christian Fischer, Director of DIIS, who asked whether we could expect perhaps Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to play a central role in how to deal with some of these states.
Thank you for the question. When we joined the EU in 2004, for years we tried to fight against being old and new, East and West. Because we joined the EU, which was united, which was unique, which spoke in one voice. And we joined the EU, which for us is democracy, 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 human rights, rule of law. And of course, it's a pity to see what's happening in some countries. You mentioned 2 countries, but we see also developments in some other countries. And although the coalition negotiations are happening today in Estonia, I would argue that having far right in Estonian government for almost 2 years also left an impact on my country and on the image of my country. I do not see any other way than being very open about it. I do not see another way than treating all the EU member states equally. And I think that the decisions of having connection to MFF and human rights, rule of law situation is the right way to do. If words are not enough, then we have to follow with actions, and we have to follow with financial and monetary actions. So now we have the rules in place. I'm just looking forward to the implementation and to the practical outcomes. And as an example, I really think that, for example, the very good decision made by Commission this summer to restrict financing to 5 Polish local authorities that declared themselves LGBTI free was the right step. And we need those steps because that's the way to protect European values and European democracy. And without that, we will not have EU. That's what unites us all.
Thank you for this. We have a comment and a question from the Danish embassy in Tallinn. So the Danish ambassador to Estonia, Christina Bækvart, thanks for your comments. And she has a question. It concerns relations between the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, of course, and Denmark. And if I may ask you then to put on your hat as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former diplomat also, Christina asked how to sort of strengthen relations again, because it seems that they are not perhaps as prominent as they used to be. And if I may just share like a brief personal story, I went to Estonia first time in 1997. And I've been to Estonia, of course, many times since. But I remember people looking at me like I was traveling to the other side of the moon. And it was so exotic. And then it suddenly became every day. And lots of people traveled, of course, and they saw this. But perhaps it's we need to rekindle our relations and perhaps to strengthen some of the relations that do exist. So the question from the Danish ambassador is, how do we do this? And she mentions one specific example, which is going green together. So for instance, environmental focus and so on. Do you have any suggestions, any ideas about how to do this?
Well, Christina, thank you so much for your remarks. And if able, I'll be happy to join. And it's so nice that you remind of the hundreds years of diplomatic relations between Estonia and Denmark. And well, for the audience, perhaps I should not remind that Estonia and Denmark have special relationship. Just think about a flag. that says everything. But the interest, on the contrary, I see that the interest is there. And I see that our cooperation has become much, much tighter in many spheres. And maybe we're cooperating on a daily basis so much with each other that we do not need anything special in our relations. Because today it's Nordic Baltic, we are one region. You mentioned becoming green together, agree, but also becoming digital together. I see our very good cooperation, for example, Estonia, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, but I do not see it yet that we are doing digital cooperation so closely with the Nordic Baltics. I think that Nordic Baltics should be an example for the whole EU. Coming from the European Parliament, trust me, when we talk about digitalization, there are so different views, there is so different level of awareness and interest towards the topic. Yes, it's now high on political agenda, but I think that that's also something where we five can do much more and much better in the EU. And we 8 can do much more and much better globally and in international relations. So I see it as a compliment, because now we are a family. We're not guests anymore. And with family members, maybe you do not have always so emotional feelings or so extraordinary relationships with the family members. But with family members, you're open, you're frank, and you want the best. And I think that's something that's happening. And I think that that is something that unites us. And Christina, thank you so much for your service in Estonia, and all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you for this. If you will allow me a question, then I would like to follow up on what you said about digitalization. So, of course, we have national digitalization. You talk also about regional, and then, of course, within the European Union as a whole. Could you perhaps just give us a little insight to the issue that you just touched upon, that we have different perspectives within the European Union? What are these perspectives? What are the possible conflicts or controversies or disagreements within the European Union when it comes to digitalization? Is it a technical issue? Is it an issue concerning privacy? What does it relate to?
When I said that we have different levels of understanding and different levels, well, I'm lucky I come from Estonia. We have enjoyed the digital lifestyle now for almost 30 years. And we understand the importance of digital lifestyle. But let's take such a small thing like digital ID. Are Danish citizens ready for digital ID? They are. But if you raise the same question, for example, I don't know, with Germans, with some other nations, they see digital IDs not as a way of digital cooperation, but as a way of surveillance by governments over them. I was here shadow rapporteur of Social Democrats for terrorist content online. And again, we had huge disagreements. For example, how far can you go with the automated control of internet on content, digital content on internet? Can you introduce automated tools or not? We were having discussions, fights about that. And finally, I'm happy that European Parliament preserved its position. And it was also written into the regulation that no automated obligatory tools. Human oversight has to prevail. These things. What is positive? The positive is that digital topics are a priority and they are on a political agenda. And I appreciate very much the endeavors by Commission. But then comes the question, do we have enough resources? Because with the budget with the new MFF budget, where we had to do cuts, or let's say Parliament was negotiating for more financial resources, we did not get as much as we were negotiating for. Do we have enough financial resources? Because digital means also cybersecurity. Cybersecurity means not only international cooperation, but awareness raising, digital hygiene, how we teach our kids, how we teach our people how to behave in digital sphere. So there are very many questions, but I'm sure that in the EU we can agree. And we can agree together also with the United States and other like-minded countries. It's more difficult when it comes to the ideological division. How do we see the future of internet? How do we see the future of digital economy and e-services. So here I'm optimistic. I think that we can cooperate closely within the EU and with our like-minded partners.
And do you see that the current pandemic, which of course is forcing us to meet like this, and it has certain benefits, but also drawbacks, of course, do you see that this is accelerating digitalization for better or worse?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I would argue that the pandemic has demonstrated what does digital lifestyle really mean, how remote working, I don't know, e-schooling, how things like that can help us, can promote our way of living, but also the shortcomings and challenges. I mentioned cybersecurity, but for example, a huge problem is online violence, which we're not used to. Yes, we're used to and we know how to tackle violence in real life, but we still have to look into online violence, do lots of awareness raising and educating among officials, including police authorities, social workers and others, and our people. The question of disinformation, the question of the role of media platforms in content moderation, it has raised lots of questions that have been somewhere, but are now at the center of discussions. So in the European Parliament, on a daily basis, we have digital discussions about different digital topics, and it's a big thing. It's on the political level. It's not anymore only in the cybersecurity units or with the IT geeks. It's with all of us, policymakers and decision makers, and on the higher political agenda. It's a big thing.
Thank you very much. We have a question relating very much to this, and it's from Tage Baumann, one of the most successful, most prominent Danish journalists on European security affairs. And Tage Baumann asks about confidence-building measures when it comes to social media, to disinformation, to fake news, and so on. How do we deal with this, for instance, within a European context, or it could be perhaps also including other European countries, let's say Russia, for instance? How do we do confidence-building measures in what is, of course, in a way, a digital domain where we now find new challenges?
It's a very good question, and it's a difficult question. It means educating people. It means raising resilience. It means addressing the right sources, putting things into the context. When I said 2004, when Estonia joined, the Baltic states joined the EU, we were talking about Russian disinformation campaigns. Nobody listened to us. Although we have been under Russian disinformation campaigns since the day we became independent, regained our independence in '91. We've been pictured as a small Nazi countries that can only create problems and should not be accepted to EU and NATO. So the problem is there. One of the steps that I really very much appreciate, and which happened 5 years ago with support of Denmark, was the East Stratcom Task Force. A task force which was established under the External Action Services. I was then Estonian Foreign Minister. I can't say that there was much enthusiasm with External Action Services to do something like that, exposing the lies, providing right data, providing right facts. Today, 5 years later, we see how this task force was also used for disinformation fighting, disinformation campaigns concerning COVID-19. So now we see how disinformation, it does not have to be political. It can be just disinformation concerning the treatment, the causes of COVID-19, and it might cause as much trouble as political disinformation. So we know what to do. Now the question is how to be more effective in using the tools that we have. So I'm really happy that Denmark together with Estonia, was among the 5 countries that established in 2015 the East Stratcom task force, which was dealing then with disinformation coming from Russia, but has today become much wider, has become respected, valued, and is doing a very good job in fighting disinformation and in educating our people and building resilience. because we need resilience in our societies. So maybe us coming from the propaganda, maybe we still have the knowledge of reading between the lines. I come from the Soviet Union. I was born in the Soviet Union. But the new generation, they need education, like they need cyber hygiene education. They need education to understand what's true, what's false, and how to deal with that.
Thank you for this. So your comment very much deals, of course, with the question of education, digital literacy, media literacy, and so on. But do you see any prospects at all for confidence building across the media divide?
It is difficult because for me, the divide is more ideological one. We can talk about confidence building measures, but in the end, it's in what we believe, in whom we trust, and how we trust. So I see it's important to educate the readers and people on social media to trust, because we are the consumers, and in the end, we have to make the decision whether we trust this source or another source or the third or the fourth source. So I think it's time for us to start acting as real consumers, to be well informed and make our decisions then. And if I bring confidence building measures to a higher level, let's say between governments, then again, I very much hope in regional cooperation. I don't think that we can do something on the United Nations level where ideological division is really big. But on a regional level, within EU, within NATO, I think that we can cooperate much more closely, and we can cooperate with others who are like-minded like us, because it very much has to do with ideology in what we believe, how we behave, and how seriously we take the information we are provided. So it's educating, and raising awareness.
Thank you, Marina, for these very important words that we can all take with us, of course, and reflect on. And it's something that the whole issue, of course, poses a challenge to all of us. And it's something that we have to get used to. It will not go away. And often when I do lectures on this, people ask me, how do we make it go away? And I tell them it's not going to go away. So we just have to live with it, and probably, I'm quite sure, in the way that you also described. So thank you very much for this, and thank you for taking the time. With this, I suggest to go to our third speaker, Vigadas Ušackas, who is, as you will know, also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, also a former diplomat, and today he's on the board of directors of Avia Solutions. And I hope that you are now with us. Mr. Ušackas, do you hear me? Mr. Ušackas had a different meeting to attend, and he said that he would be here around this time, but there is perhaps perhaps he's running late. I suggest then instead to improvise, to go to our fourth speaker, who is Zanyeta Ozolina. And Zanyeta, I hope, is with us. I see that she's there. And Zanyeta is a professor of security studies at the University of Riga, a very prominent scholar in the region. For those of you fortunate enough to attend, for instance, the Riga conferences, you will always see her as she's either speaking or she's moderating some of the key panels there. So I'm very pleased that you could join us today also to bring us a voice from Latvia. And now we heard earlier that Marina described Per Carlsen as a think tanker. And that, of course, is very much in line also with some of the work that you do. And I'm sure that you also had meetings with Per, of course, when he was in Riga, also concerning some of these issues. So if it's fine with you, Zanyeta, I suggest we improvise, and perhaps we can take your words. And I know that you have a presentation to share with us. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fleming, very much for inviting to this event and making me part of so lively discussion, which is devoted to so life-loving and so Baltic relevant personality as Per Carlsen. And above all, what was already said about Per, I could say that indeed his personality was attraction point, because people wanted to meet, to talk, to discuss, and to take part in different events where he was present or he organized, because it was always filled with humor, with laughter, with passion to what he was doing, and also support to people in the Baltic states who were striving for our independence and democratization, and also building our EU and NATO membership. But as you mentioned, Fleming, Per was a person who was very much interested in studies. And therefore, I decided this time probably to introduce one of the recent study, which I do together with my colleagues, which is devoted, of course, to security. And interestingly enough, I met Per first time in 1994, and it was a seminar in Geneva, which was devoted to security issues. So Geneva Security Institute, of course, everybody was debating security. And then I decided to interview him for one of my studies, because he was engaged in building up Baltic Battalion. And I was asked, and I was asking Per, what was the most surprising for you when you were talking with potential soldiers and you were recruiting soldiers for the Baltic Battalion? And then he said the most striking thing was the state of teeth in the Baltic states. And it again demonstrates his sense of humor. And by the way, I was also very fortunate to work with him in the last 3 years, because he invited me to be part of European Humanities Universities board. And indeed, starting from 95 to 2020, we were meeting every year, several times per year, and doing a lot of discussions on security issues. So therefore, I would like to introduce a few results of the study, and allow me to share the screen. So here it is. And I will make the screen bigger. So you can see here what is the title of the study. It's Subjective Security Perception in Latvia, Impact on Security Policy Making. And I can't say that there haven't been studies enough on security in Latvia, but the point is that very often either these are policy-driven studies, which are very important and relevant for policy decision-making, what are main arguments, what are main discussions in the field, and then there are enough quantitative studies which calculate how many percentage are in favor of one or another position, what are attitudes of individuals. But what was not done enough, it was this subjective feeling, how people in Latvia feel about security and how it impacts security policy making in large. And it's not an easy task to carry out such a study, because in case of a clear potential aggressor or adversary, and you know exactly who is going to be attacker or those who would like to provoke discontent in the country, then you know that the full responsibility falls into the hands of the state and in the hands of respective government. And such kind of security thinking and security perception also prevailed in Latvia when Latvia decided to become NATO and EU member. So this was the main driving force, or the main driving argument, how to withstand against external aggression. After 2014, the security landscape drastically changed in the country, like in Estonia and Lithuania, and Marina already described the situation very well. In case of hybrid threats, so security policy is not only a policy which could be implemented by respective governments and the state at large. It requires a variety of actors, starting from the state, which still is the main actor, but also ending up with individuals. To what extent each individual is aware of potential threats and risks, and how this individual reacts in case of crisis or in the case of potential crisis. So if is there an ability to evaluate, to assess what is happening in the landscape of potential risks in the country, but also in the region and international system at large. So therefore, the security perception of the individual, it can serve as the relevant capability. I use this term capability in case of crisis. So individual knows exactly what to do. There is no time needed to explain, to convince, and so on. And also the same individual, if he is not well informed and he doesn't know what and how to act, it can become also a potential capability for an adversary. So therefore, this subjective perception became a very important issue for studies because of increase of hybrid threats after 2014. And even if I fully agree with Marina that we know what disinformation and hybrid campaigns mean starting from the end of 80s, the beginning of 90s, but such an organized and such a, how to say, so well prepared and strategy-based hybrid threats as not only Ukraine, but also countries in the West experienced after 2014, it required also analysis what is happening in society. And yeah, I already explained it that indeed we knew exactly what is happening, but still Latvian population reacted in a different way. There were groups of society who immediately perceived this event as some kind of repetition of the occupation of 1940, which could happen in the Baltic states. And there were also enough loud voices who were quite critical about EU's and US sanctions against Russia because it influences business in the country, and there's always some kind of passion for business, for farmers to be protected and to be taken care by government, by society, even not looking at potential risks and threats. So society demonstrated to be very diverse. And I wanted to mention a few illustrations, because prior to 2014, what is important to remember that there was also a very well orchestrated referendum in Latvia offering Russia as a second state language. And it also demonstrated that still society is very diverse because society was very divided, even despite the fact that the referendum lost and Latvian language is still the main state language, but it demonstrated that there is something happening in society which needs to be studied more efficiently. And here I show you just a few figures. This was a study which was done by government, and it was done exactly after this language referendum. And that's how they describe different policy issues in the country. And this was survey done mostly by, it was done mostly amongst Russian speakers in the country, because according to methodology, we do not count just Latvians or Russians ethnically, but all studies carried out in Latvia, they are based on the groupings which are based on language spoken in the family. So you can have even mixed marriage, Latvian and Russian, and if in the family Russian is a spoken language, then this person belongs to Russian-speaking community. Sometimes it's also self-identification, but to make it clear that Russian speakers are those who use Russian in their daily family life. And here's the question: was Latvia doing good when it was part of the Soviet Union? And 61% of Russian speakers agree that Latvia was doing good. And of course, it's a question why around 2012, 2013, still country being already for some time EU member and NATO member, and still percentage is so high. The next illustration: people in Latvia would do better if it was part of Eurasian Union. And also agree, disagree. You see, percentages are very divided. And is Russia's politics danger to Latvia? And 14% agree, and 78% disagree with the statement. So if you are building a policy which is based on potential provocation on one side, and society considers that this side is not a potential provocator, then for security policy, it rings a bell. Also, how do you evaluate Putin's actions regarding Ukraine? And this is a study which is directly devoted to Ukraine's issue. And again, according to the language spoken in a family, you see that there is a huge difference. Positive among Latvians only 10%, while Russian speakers 66.5%. Others can be divided again, so it's a very big percentage. It can be divided in different ways. How do you support EU and US sanctions against Russia? Again, you see the difference that Latvians are more in favor. Russians, again, are very low in their support. And what about most recent study? This was what I explained to you right now. It was more a landscape, which still was driving our study. And by the way, when I had this idea about starting study on subjective security perception, I also had a chat with Per, what he was thinking about this kind of a study. And he was very curious and interested how the study could end up, because one of the ideas behind the study was not to do one more quantitative survey in the country, but it was more based on focus group methodology, to go to the countryside, to go to small villages, to bigger towns, to smaller towns, and on the basis of discussions with mixed group of people, to find out what is the state of security perception in the country. And when we started the study, then still it was more Ukraine's shadow which was driving the whole study. But in between, the government decided to propose comprehensive defense approach, which is based on involvement of society in preparations for potential crisis and building societal resilience. But also COVID-19 added some flavor to the study as well. So focus groups and different parts of the country. And here is the first overview or summary of what were main subjective perceptions of security, what people were worried about. And again, it goes back to this comprehensive security, not comprehensive defense, but comprehensive security approach, which is to very large extent constructed by Nordic scholars and also Danish scholars. Still, there is a division between them and us, and those who were interviewed agreed that these divisions in society, gaps in society, are still there. And it also immediately leads to security if there is no trust in the state, no trust in public institutions, then probably there could be some implications for security policy making as well, particularly in situation of crisis. Unpredictability was mostly mentioned because of COVID-19. And this is a tendency, I think, which is present almost in all societies going through those difficult months. Then dependence on EU funds, and particularly in smaller municipalities, smaller towns, people were concerned what will happen with their income and their welfare if, for instance, EU funds will be exhausted. Corruption, lack of long-term vision and planning, trust in local government. Riga was perceived as a city not belonging to Latvia, but shabby Soviet town. And here I quote one of participants of our discussion. Lack of communication with society on all levels was also mentioned very many times. Regional reforms, lack of knowledge of what to do in case of crisis. And this was a very interesting point because when interviews were carried out 1.5 years ago, then there was a clear lack of knowledge. But after introduction of comprehensive defense concept, we did some additional surveys in the same focus groups, and it was obvious increase of awareness what to do in the case of crisis, which definitely pays tribute to Ministry of Defense, who is in charge for comprehensive defense strategy. And then health reform system, which was also nicely, of course, ironically described, that healthcare system reform has become a swear word in Latvian society. But how the situation looks in terms of differences. And here I put a table and I try to summarize and this will be my last slide where I summarized how different parts of country differ. And here are a few interesting findings which I wanted to mention. Here you see those municipalities where we're carrying out the study, but there are some additional municipalities, in total 14, here are less. No doubt that a lot of focus groups mentioned economic risks. Again, just remember Latvia in 2009, 2010 was our financial and economic crisis, now COVID crisis. So it looks that it's not a crisis, but for Latvian society, it's a permanent state of affairs to face different economic challenges. Then political issues, but political issues are very much related to stability of governments, political trust, and many other issues. Then Latvia, again, being in terms of societal diversity, very rich country, Russian speakers, Polish, Lithuanian speakers, and so on. Societal issues are not so prevalent in security perception, and very often they are related to migration issues because of migration flows starting from 2015 in the EU, also reflected in security perception of society. And then environmental, and here probably Latvia differs from our European neighbors. Only in Riga, environmental issues were perceived as a risk for individuals. And this is an interesting issue because if you look at government's priorities, president's priorities, or what is a discourse of prime minister, it's always climate change, it's always environment, it's a lot of policy initiatives, policy papers, but it doesn't ring the bell in society. Looking at personal security, people are not afraid of crime, any crime types. It's more personal, it's education, it's emotions, and these are health. Hybrid threats, as you can see here on the slide, are not dominant at all. Yes, 4 areas are mentioning that, but still it's not a majority of municipalities. One of the reasons also asking in the second round of focus group interviews is that people are aware And since they are aware of potential hybrid threats, they are not afraid of them. So they know that they are there, and they know that they have to be cautious to check information and probably not to rely on whatever they see. But then look at military threats, and again, to some extent, the study is driven by Ukraine and what happened in Ukraine. So Latvian population is not so afraid of potential military threats, but this is only one municipality which put it among top three priorities. And this is Ādaži. And those of you who knows enhanced forward presence distribution and stationing in Latvia, then you know that Ādaži is the main military base where soldiers from NATO member states are located. And this is a very rich municipality. It receives a lot of income from business located there, but also from national armed forces, enhanced forward present forces. And at the same time, there are differences in a way how society, inhabitants of Ādaži, and also local governments, because another part of the study is that we received a picture of what is the combination of different threats and risks perceived by individuals. We also interviewed members of local councils, either municipal or city councils. And in Ādaži, it was clear divide. So people were afraid of potential military risks, while, for instance, municipalities said no military risk because of bases. We are very safe, and also economically and socially, we are doing very well. So the study will be published quite soon in summer this year in summer. Then we will combine even more findings and more analysis. And I can say that I can only regret that Per will not be among readers of the study, but I hope that his colleagues from DIIS and also his colleagues from diplomatic service will be able to get at least some information about societal security issues in the country. Thank you.
Thank you for this, Zanieta. Thank you for sharing. It's always interesting, of course, to see work in progress. And as I sense this is ready to go into publication, we look forward to reading it. And of course, it will be much appreciated within the community. I'm sure some of the people attending today will also be looking out for this. So thank you for this. Let me, if you will allow me, start with a question. Now, I'm curious about the term comprehensiveness that you speak about. What do you mean by this, and what kind of process do you see within, for instance, Latvia in this case, when it comes to building comprehensiveness? How do you engineer a kind of like a stronger sense of cohesiveness within a state?
Yeah, indeed. It's a very complex issue, and for a very long time, at least among security community, this comprehensive security approach was mostly related to diverse sectors of security, which have to be treated in complex, not singling out one or another. But after crisis in Ukraine and war in Ukraine, it became obvious that Latvian society, let's say, in their perception of security, they don't treat it as a comprehensive issue. It's still prevailing either or. And plus, it became clear that in terms of security policy making, there was also missing this comprehensive approach. MOD was MOD, Ministerial Interior was Interior, but in case of hybrid threats, in case of hybrid attack, the sectoral approach to security doesn't work. So therefore, this comprehensive defense concept, which is still, again, in Latvian, it sounds softer and more understandable, why in English it's always confusion what to do with that. It's more about building societal resilience to potential risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. It's more informing people about what actions have to be taken in case of something goes wrong. And in last year, Ministry of Defense really invested a lot of efforts, which started to pay off, because sometimes it seems to me if something has to be quickly fixed with COVID-19, it's not Ministry of Health or Ministry of Finances or whatever, it's Ministry of Defense. And because the organization is much better established. So therefore, now this comprehensiveness with pandemic becomes even more relevant. What is the procurement? Is procurement really meets the needs and goals of society? Is, for instance, municipality working with its community, with inhabitants, informing what is needed for situation in crisis? And this comprehensiveness more and more becomes part of security discussions, but also in terms of security policy making, it becomes very present right now.
Well, thank you. If I now, when I looked at your slides and very interesting figures that you have presented and the data that you have collected, I sense, of course, and I guess that's part of your conclusion, sort of different interpretations across Latvia. How do you reconcile those? So if you have part of a population who are mainly concerned about economic issues, another part is mainly concerned about something else, how do you manage to deal with that and to bridge those gaps within even a relatively small country such as Latvia?
Yeah, it's very, very, again, difficult question. And we are independent already starting from 1990. And during those long years of building societal trust, we haven't gone very far. We've definitely gone some kilometers, no doubts about that. But I think that in recent years, this consolidation of society is becoming even more difficult because of COVID and different information spaces. And for instance, we are still questioning in the country, and this is one of the issues which is on TV screens, in media almost daily. How comes that the average number or percentage of those who would like to be vaccinated in case of COVID, it's around 70%, 70, which for Latvia is a very good percentage because we are a country which is against vaccination in general. So there's only one vaccine which is taken, it's again ticks. Otherwise, no. So this anti-vaccination movement is very strong, but now it's 70%. But in Daugavpils, which is the second largest city in the country, next to Belarusian and Russian border, with 83% of Russian-speaking population, only 10% of population is ready to vaccinate. 10%. And this is a huge difference. And nobody can answer. You cannot say it's only information space. It's something more. And therefore, why is this societal relations are so relevant? Not always government and municipality, but sometimes it's society to society, professional community to professional community. But Fleming, I can tell you that there is another project on the way. And when we will finish this one with identifying this subjective perception, then we will have project which will be carried out in the eastern part of Latvia, in municipalities which are bordering Russia, asking exactly those questions: why and how, what we could do more to be more informed, to be better prepared. But this will be the next step. Probably I will come to another this seminar next year.
Well, please do. Now we have it on recording, of course, and it means that you are committed now. So we would be very happy to welcome you back to present those findings. Let me just wrap up now with to repeat the question by repeating the question of Terje Baumann. Now you partially answered his question already, which of course was addressed to Marina, but I think it's still very relevant here. And it has to do, as you will remember, with this, with the digital domain, with information and so on. And you already sort of hinted at the fact that we may not be able to explain all of these differences within Latvia with reference to media consumption alone. But I do notice, of course, from your data that there is you see differences, of course, across language groups. To what extent do you find, also based on some of your previous work, which I take the chance now to also to recommend to everyone here, how do you explain those differences with reference to media consumption? How important is this in Latvia?
It is very important, but the models of consumption of media are changing everywhere. They are changing in Russia, they are changing in Latvia, and they are changing in the West as well. And at the present moment, we are in the state of shift from classical media, newspapers, TV, radio, to different platforms, to internet media. And at the present moment, this some kind of first round of analysis demonstrates that there are more and more so-called information bubble spaces where you cannot see a large group of people following only one information source. If everybody in Latvia who are speaking Russian language would watch Russian Первый Балтийский Canal, it would be easy, actually, to find out what is happening, what are tools of influence, what are ways of thinking, and so on. But it's not the case. So, first of all, we have to identify what are those main information bubbles, what is the structure of those people who are following them, and only then we will be able to answer your question. It seems to me that people do not tend to sit in one bubble. They definitely sit in several ones, which makes the whole picture even more complex. Yeah, like for instance, our study demonstrates that Russian-speaking youth in Latvia, they do not sit in a social platform, Однокурсники, I can't remember still this Russian name. This is a special Russian platform for communication. They use Facebook, but within the Facebook, they have their closed communication community. And yeah, it's still something which is constantly in the progress, constantly in flux, and it needs a very special and very careful attention indeed.
Great. Thank you for this. Thank you for sharing your work, and thank you, of course, for joining us today, Zanyeta. And we all look forward to reading your piece once it's out. I'll definitely have to watch out for it and look very much forward to that. So thank you.
Thank you.
With this, I suggest to go to Vigaudas Ušackas, who has joined us now. And Mr. Ušackas, as you will know, is also former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former ambassador also. He held different positions. And he now is on the board of Avia Solutions, which is the representation that he has today. Mr. Ušackas, I hope that you are with us now.
Yes, I hope I am.
You are. We hear you. We see you. It's so good to have you here. And we see your Avia Solutions background, of course. So I was right in my introduction of you. It's very nice to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Fleming. And first of all, let me thank you and the Danish Institute for International Studies for organizing a seminar in memory of our dear friend, Per Carlsen. Also, I apologize and regret that I wasn't able to listen the words of wisdom of Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, the person whom I highly regard as my mentor in diplomacy and politics. And of course, I'm sure Marina Carliorant has made an excellent presentation. So I'll try to, I don't know whether you're going to put it as a webinar on the space internet that I could watch again and it was pleasure to listen Janetta. I will not be as comprehensive in the way Janetta was with her professor researcher skills, but of course I mean, I'm very moved being invited to share some thoughts about Per, our dear friend, but also on some of other things you asked us to feel free. Indeed, the last time I spoke with Per was, as I remember vividly, it was Sunday, 29th of November. I was on the road from my lake house back to Vilnius, and we talked about exactly comprehensive security, about disinformation, about the seminar he's due to organize together with the colleagues in Copenhagen. I think it's in May or April. And just, I mean, in a few days, so 10, 12 days later, I got that extremely sad message that he passed away. He was a great friend of Baltics. He was a personal friend of mine and our family, a person with a broad mind and big heart, professionally and community and family wise. You know, I met first time Per, must probably been between 92 and 96 at NATO. I was the first Lithuanian liaison counselor, and I think he was at that time head of the political section or already deputy head to ambassador. Then, so we used to meet him occasionally during the different committee meetings and I mean, drafting NACSI, North Atlantic Cooperation Council communiques. Later on, in 1996, he came, upon my return to Vilnius, he came to Vilnius accompanying the RAND Corporation delegation, which consisted of also later on Asmus, but also Steve Larrabee and Bob Nurek. He was only kind of local from the region, and I understood that he was providing kind of, I mean, soft lifting for RAND guys, not only to preach us what should we not do and what should we do, but also giving a little bit of regional perspective and promoting awareness, understanding why the Baltics are important. And since then, he was very much devoted to the Baltic security because, I mean, from his conviction, from his belief, the membership of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia in NATO and the European Union corresponded to the vital security interests of Denmark. And that's what he drove him, which is natural as a Danish diplomat. I mean, caring about his own country, he early on, alongside with Uffe, Ellemann-Jensen, and with Hans Hakerup and others, have led the efforts to facilitate and support our strife. I also remember him in the position of Undersecretary of Defense when he worked hand by hand with late Minister Hans Hakerup to lead the establishment of the Baltic Peacekeeping Battalion and Baltic Defense College in Tartu, among many, many other projects. Per's character of strategic vision, combined with resilience, practicability, and persuasion, had earned him a reputation of highly professional diplomat and influential thinker. Indeed, combination of skills, empirical knowledge, and background of service both in NATO and the Baltics, but also in Russia, Moscow, positioned him as a very insightful researcher whose views were highly respected across the Baltic Sea, from Copenhagen to Moscow to Washington, D.C. and beyond. As we all know, he was a very staunch NATO supporter. As a first foreign ambassador to Lithuania, he was the first, I mean, as ambassador to Lithuania, he was the first one to raise the NATO flag in front of Danish embassy. I mean, in memory and in honor of that, I'm wearing also a NATO tie today. so as to reconnect with those good times and something which remains of of high importance. I must say and must confess that we did not always see eye to eye when it comes to European Union evolution. And that's probably also enshrined by the special Danish approach to the European Union. But I mean, Per also believed in significance that NATO membership, larger NATO US presence in the Baltics, should also be accompanied by the confidence building measures and bridges with Russia. And in fact, in his latest opinion published by Carnegie Moscow, and I'll quote, Per said the following, that in a high tension environment in relations with Russia, it is important to keep channels open for political dialogue and to seek ways in which existing confidence building measures can be reactivated. End of the quote. Of course, Per did not limit his thoughts and attention only to the Baltic region. And I'm sure if he was today with us around the table at the Danish Institute of International Studies or in his favorite restaurant in front of the Foreign Ministry of Denmark, having his favorite herring and Carlsberg and maybe a little bit of schnapps at the end, he would certainly provoke us to talk about what is at stake today, what is of highly most important developments taking place. And I think we would have spent a lot of time talking about United States of America. Something which we're going to witness tomorrow when the change of arms will take place, coat of arms will take place by the Congress. And that is, I think, that is something I would like to contribute to a discussion, not necessarily today, but maybe for the next round of events of the DIIS, because I think it's important that we retain community of the Baltic Sea researchers, politicians, and experts, and we employ our skills, insights, and provide advice for the governments. How can we better security of the Baltic Sea region? Of course, high hopes and anticipations are harvested in many European capitals, with advised impeach President Trump leaving the White House tomorrow. Many in Europe view the incoming Biden-Harris administration as opening of renaissance in transatlantic relations. However, Donald Trump's oversimplified imprint of the world, black and white, or good and bad, will not be easy to erase. America First and Make America Great Again is still embraced and supported by millions, one should not forget. More than 74 million Americans casted the vote for Trump in the recent elections. Some, albeit tiny minority of them, on 8th of January stormed and occupied the US Congress, which is, unprecedented since 1819, I believe. Causing deaths and injuries. Others may still believe in Trump and shall continue questioning the election outcome. So the wounds of political divide and civil strife over racism will not be easy to heal. And of course, for any kind of reconciliation or bipartisanship, two takes to tango. Will we see more bipartisanship on the Hill? Will we see new leadership of Republican Party emerging and confronting Trump's policies? Or will we see Trump continue to remain the most popular position among the Republicans and broader supporters and continue playing a very prominent role in the years to come? On trade, to complicate the matters, President-elect Joe Biden also expressed a commitment to Buy America First concept. Thus, trade negotiations, which are the core of relationship between Europe and the United States, or US and China, will not be easy either. Of course, highly experienced Joe Biden's Kamala Harris national team, and we know all of them, and I worked personally with all of them very closely, both in Washington, D.C. and then in foreign postings like Tony Blinken, William Burns, Jake Sullivan, Wendy Sherman, Victoria Nuland, and foreign policy statements which President Biden made during and after elections indicate the return of the US foreign policy to a traditional multilateralism, alliances, and international rule-based system. However, one should not be complacent that transition of the US administration will smoothly bring and satisfy expectations of many committed transatlanticists on both sides of Atlantic, who believe in the virtue of importance of the US and Europe alliance. A lot is going to be on plate for President Biden, Vice President Harris, and new administration. And we'll hear more about new administration priorities tomorrow in the days and weeks to come. However, now it's already clear that new administration, President Biden, will be preoccupied with the recovery of the US economy from COVID pandemic, internal reconciliation, 11 million or 8 million immigrants' legal status to be reviewed, rejoinment of the Paris Climate Accord, most likely rejoinment of the World Health Organization, and everywhere, whenever they will speak about it, China will be in the background of the US. So what will be the priorities of the US administration towards Europe and the Baltic region? What are the common interests of the Baltic and Nordic states vis-a-vis United States' role in Europe, region, and the world? Can we shape common agenda and kind of action plan how to strengthen and retain the US engagement in the region, if we can agree, 8 of us, and then to promote that agenda through the EU Council? And of course, with many internal and external priorities, which I mentioned, how to attain the US attention to the region as a beauty contest among allies to get Washington, D.C.'s attention has already started. So those are the things which I would wish we could devote some time, probably today, but more importantly, I think in the coming weeks and months, since I strongly believe that regeneration of Nordic-Baltic cooperation as a sub-European political entity provides a lot, provides a better and stronger avenues to influence decision-making process, be it in Brussels or back in Washington, D.C. And thanks again, Fleming, for having me. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Vigaldas, for these comments, your words on Per, and of course your reflections on especially the US election. Thank you also for your suggestion that we team up and look into what this means for our region. It has been noted, and we'll definitely come back to you. I think it's a great suggestion. It's something that we should do together. Now, Mr. Uffe Ellemann-Jensen spoke about small states, and how small states navigate in the international system. And the question I asked him is related also to the US presidential election and the inauguration that we'll see tomorrow. Now, elegant as always, he waltzed around Donald Trump and didn't mention him by name, but it was implied, of course, in this presentation also. So the question I would like to ask you, as I also asked Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, is how do you see those last 4 years, the preceding 4 years? What does this mean for the small states of Europe? And do you see any changes now that we go into a Biden presidency? Do you think that it will it change anything for us?
Well, if one, in a simple term, one may say, yes, what Donald Trump has left after 4 years in office is America divided, allies alienated, and the world changed. The world changed in a way that other political actors, be China, Russia, or Turkey, had filled the vacuum in international developments, be it tackling the crisis like Syria, or promoting its own governance and its own investment and relationships, or questioning further, alongside with Donald Trump's statements, the international rules-based system. Having said this, however, objectively, if you view the position, I would say probably, of all three Baltic states and Poland, despite of all the grievances and public arguments between European leaders and Donald Trump, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia and Poland have managed, I would argue, to increase its defensibility through additional deployment, through greater emphasis and rotational presence of NATO member states. And thus, I would argue, we have not jeopardized our core national interests vis-a-vis United States presence in the region, probably even increased. Secondly, I believe we also managed to retain, albeit not necessarily sufficient, United States attention to other developments, be it in Ukraine or Belarus. Initially, as you remember, United States under President Trump continued a strong engagement in Ukraine with a political participation in Minsk talks, or facilitating talks between Ukraine and Russia and talking to the Russians, which later have kind of evaporated. We have not also seen, despite of the visit of Steve Biegun to the region, he was here in Vilnius and then in Moscow and back in Kiev, if not mistaken. But it hasn't translated into a concerted efforts to lead the alliance with a view to frame a common policy towards Belarus and continue on the one hand, supporting democratic opposition, but on the other hand, engaging Moscow. Because what is clear, and that's what we spared last time we had a conversation, whether we like it or not, but the reality is, the one person who can, not who can ring the call, but whose call Alexander Lukashenko is responding is Vladimir Putin. And that, I think, was clearly recognized by professional diplomats of United States when Steve Biegun went to Vilnius and then to Moscow, trying to engage with the Kremlin, a conversation about Belarus. But that was already too late, and I think Kremlin seen in Trump administration a lame duck, and that hasn't produced any, unfortunately, any tangible results.
Thank you for this. Now, you mentioned, of course, a couple of burning European issues relevant for you, relevant for us, very much relevant for us in this country also, Belarus and Ukraine. So do you see now that we need to get used to the fact that we have to deal with this to a greater extent alone? Even if we have a change in the US administration, is it a long-term perspective now that we need to be able to stand our own ground on some of these issues and deal with it from a European perspective?
Well, personally, I'm convinced advocate for both for transatlantic unity, but also for European strategic capacity. It's not, there are two different concepts. One, which, with all respect, President Macron is speaking a lot about strategic autonomy. But then there is another concept to which I belong. Those who share the view that European Union, before speaking about autonomy, first of all, we have to acquire necessary strategic capacity. First of all, in cultivating a common understanding about threat perception, agreeing on a common risks and threats, and then having diplomatic, which we have, European External Action Service, which has to improve, to work as a team, intelligence assets and military assets. Without that, without having that capacity, and without necessary investment, which Denmark and the Baltic states and Poland do, we as European Union collectively will not be, seriously considered, but will not be able to influence decision-making process or developments around the world. I remember vividly from my own work as EU Special Representative in Afghanistan, when Richard Holbrooke will turn and say, okay, which check the European Union can take, and my instructions was to come back to Richard Dick and say, well, we not only pay, but we also want to play, and that is something I think is going to be inevitable, and that's something we as the Nordics and the Baltics should discuss and try to achieve a common denominator so as to push agenda forward. Having said this, however, of course, I would expect that with experienced diplomats and committed Europeans like Tony Blinken, like Victoria Nuland, like Bill Burns coming into the national security team of Biden and Harris, I certainly expect them to re-engage much stronger with the EU member states and with the EU institutions. It's clearly, the appointment of Sherman as a Deputy Secretary of State already sends a message that Biden will re-engage in talks over Iran nuclear deal, and that they will devote a lot of attention in cooperation, be it a democracy summit, what he has spoken, or return to the Paris climate change. And I think those are all positive signs which have to be supported and to be reciprocated from European side. And again, the time, it's not only that America has changed, it's not only that Europeans have also changed, but the world has changed. And we need to be in a position to pay our due, but also, to provide the capacity to deliver.
Thank you for this. Well, absolutely, and I think it's a very good point to make. It's not the Americans that have changed. The world has changed, and we have to get ready for it, and we have to prepare ourselves. So thank you for that. We are getting to the end. I would like to just ask you one final question, and it's a question that was put earlier to Marina Carliorant, and it's from Christina Bækvart, Danish ambassador to Estonia, who just left us, but she'll be watching the rest of this later tonight. She wrote to me, and she asked about how to revitalize relations between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania on one side, and Denmark on the other side, or perhaps in a wider context between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and the Nordic countries. Is there anything that you could suggest also, based on your previous experience, to revitalize any common agendas that we can build on?
Yeah, I kind of departed from national diplomacy already, 10 years ago, having spent 8 years with the EU and now 2 years in business. But at least I'm not that informed as Danish ambassador to Estonia, but a feeling I have, and on the surface, what I see and hear, that we long the times when we were working as a true family. We remain family members, but I don't think we have the same teamwork approach, family team approach as we used to have. When for any significant decision or development, be it something happening in Afghanistan or Iran or with the EU and US, we would first talk among ourselves and then try to shoot the same message in Brussels, be it NATO and the EU. I long those times. I think they deserve to be rejuvenated, and that's when it comes to practicability, what Per had always reminded, I think I would start with concrete steps like, similar event what we have among the think tank researchers in what can we do, what kind of advice, recommendations we can provide to decision makers in Copenhagen, in 3 capitals and 5+3, so as to rejuvenate that unique forum. And I mean, no, it's not just for the sake that we are around the Baltic Sea and we know each other for a significant time, but it's, it's a fact of life and decision-making process that the EU as NATO, I mean, they work in coalitions and in a friendly coalitions of like-minded. And I think we cannot take it for granted that our past will always stand like that if we don't, if we don't cherish, if we don't continue to promote this 5+3 cooperation.
Thank you for this very fitting comments to wrap up our webinar. It's very much, of course, sort of in the spirit of what we're doing today, very much in the spirit of Per Carlsen also. And I'll remind you that we're here, of course, to celebrate the memory of Per Carlsen, former ambassador, former director, the first director at DIIS, the Danish Institute for International Studies. So with this, I would like to thank you. As you will see, we have announced a final speaker, Splutz, who is the director of the Latvian Institute for International Affairs. But I received a message from Mr. Splutz while we are conducting this webinar. Unfortunately, he's been held up in a meeting. He's a member of the Senate of the University of Latvia in Riga, and the meeting is still ongoing. So he sends his best wishes and regrets, of course, that he cannot join us today. So we will have to do without him. I do recommend and encourage you, of course, to go to the website of the Latvian Institute for International Affairs. You can check out his work and the work by his colleagues, and it's very much recommended. You'll find some interesting studies there. Let me thank our speakers, Uffe Ellemann-Jensen, Marina Carliorant, Zanieta Ozolina, and of course, also Mr. Osaskas here at the end, for joining us today, for taking the time in supporting the work at DIIS. You can go to the DIIS website and you can find more events and you can find our publications. If you go to the very end of our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter and get all the information automatically. As a final word, let me also mention that we have another webinar tomorrow. Please join me at 2 o'clock Danish time tomorrow afternoon, when we bring you voices from Russia, also in memory of Per Carlsen. And I have a spectacular lineup for you tomorrow. 3 Russian researchers. We have Dmitry Trenin, we have Lilia Shevtsova, and we have also Andrei Kartunov. It's 2 o'clock, and I hope to see many of you there. So with this, I thank you for taking part in today's webinar. I wish everyone good luck. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a nice evening. See you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.